Wonderful. Thanks so much, Christina. So good morning, everyone, and good morning from Europe. Robert is 8 hours different, so it's evening time over in Australia. So thank you for being with us, Robert. So a very warm welcome to our first webinar series of the European Institute for Advanced Studies in Management. And thank you all for joining us and being with us today. So we are delighted that 3 of our board members, Robert FAFF, Dana Munbeva and Chris Chapman, shall present this first webinar series. And they're going to speak to topics that reflect the mission of the Institute, which is to foster and support innovative, rigorous, responsible and impactful research in management, in governance and related disciplines. So thank you so much to our board members in advance for their valuable contributions on our opening topics, which are all interdisciplinary in nature. So first up today, we have Robert, who's going to speak around the topic of responsible science. And next on the 4th of June, our next webinar, we have Dana from Copenhagen Business School. And Dana is going to speak on the end of global mobility and talk around the challenges and opportunities for international business as a consequence. And then our third webinar will be with Chris Chapman from Bristol University on the 18th of June. And he's going to speak about writing qualitative research method sections in terms of our publications. So for our first session, it's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Professor Robert Pfaff. And Robert is Professorial Fellow at Bond University and is Emeritus Professor of Finance at the University of Queensland Business School. He has an international reputation in empirical finance research, and this is reflected in significant Research Council awards, referee journal publications, and indeed his citations in H-Index, according to Google Scholar. So Robert's particular passion is nurturing the career trajectories of early career researchers. And Robert has supervised almost 50 doctoral students to completion, and also has examined at least a further 50 PhD dissertations. Robert has also been involved in editing journals and currently is editor-in-chief of the Pacific Basin Finance Journal. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Robert.
Thank you very much, Geraldine. Very kind words of introduction, and I'm super excited to be the inaugural presenter in our new series. What I'm going to do, I think very shortly, apart from sharing the screen, I will turn off my video. There's a long story, but I want to share that with you. I have a weak internet connection on this occasion. And so I think if I save some bandwidth by closing the video, it will do us better in terms of hopefully improving the audio quality, which I'm a little worried about. So let me just do a few little things here. And of course, we do this, we've all done this 100 times, and every time I do it, I feel like it's the very first time. And of course, everything's popping up in front of the screen, but I will get there. All right, that's what I want to share with you. So hopefully now you can see I'm quite in presentation mode, and I think I will turn my video off as soon as I can remember how to do that. Stop video. All right. So I apologize, and I'm going to go to presentation mode. So the lovely front slide of my deck, hopefully, is now filling your screen. And this is a wonderful shot of the campus at Bond University. It's a very small university on the Gold Coast in Australia, but I would have to say one of the prettiest campuses that you would ever wish to see. My previous university, University of Queensland, has a fabulous campus. I love it, but this one at Bond is just magic. Okay, the topic of my talk is responsible science, and what I want to do is give you a view of what this topic's about. It's something that is in parts controversial, in parts it's challenging, and in parts it's a bit scary. And hopefully I can explain all of those things as we move on. But in the end, it's one person's view. And while I believe I would have many that would agree with me on certain elements, there are other elements where there would be not so much agreement. And, you know, that's the nature of the game that we play. So let me start with my view of what is meant by responsible science. And to me, there are three key pillars to this, and these are displayed on the slide. The first pillar is the bread and butter of academics, of researching academics. It's essentially what we've been born and bred to do, I guess, and that is to produce scholarly research, to produce research that is credible and that tells us something important about how the world works from the perspective of the discipline to which we belong. Now, of course, there are some of us that don't wish to be just pigeonholed into one discipline, and interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary produces very important research. It's far more difficult than I could ever sort of deal with. And I think it requires an even further, a further consideration of the issues that I'm putting on the table. But I wouldn't want to, I guess, pretend that the view that I will have will perfectly fit multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary. But the key pillar that I think is a foundation of all we do and that we should do is the scholarly research. The pillar one, we want to share credible research with our colleagues and with the world. The second pillar is around what I call relevant research. And as I'll talk a little bit later on, relevant research is fairly easy to grasp. In fact, none of this there's no rocket science here. It's about creating in our research programs research that is more useful and more useful to non-academics. The third pillar is around independence, and it's basically the argument or the view or the aspiration, but hopefully aspiration sounds like it's unattainable, and that's to be independent, to be independent researchers. So they're the foundational pillars. And I should remember to say right now that my view of how this all works is that it's not a case of we need to strive to achieve every pillar in full throttle mode. It's quite okay for us, at least with some of our research, that it's not as relevant or as useful as it might otherwise be. We should always have credible research, so I think that one's going to be hard to give up, and I suppose also the independence is something that we would want to guard more, quite carefully. But I would still make the point that it's not like we need to strive for 100% of all of these in terms of being responsible scientists, if that's how we want to describe ourselves. So let's throw at you some markers of what I think about as potentially good indicators of responsible. And this is not an exhaustive list. and maybe there are some controversial elements to it, but let me put it on the table. Maybe some of the Q&A that we get later on might, for example, decide that you want to pick these apart a little bit more. But for me, there should be a true contest of ideas. So if there's not a true contest of ideas, I would worry that it somehow doesn't have the core essence of being research. It should avoid twisted and contorted narratives. And, you know, when I go through some of these things, it's sort of like a bit of therapy. I can think back to some of the papers very early on in my career, you know, so I've been researching for 30 plus years, and some of the early papers that I remember writing, it just felt like the narrative was so twisted and contorted because the outcome of the tests wasn't straightforward. And so in order to get published, you need to twist and turn to try and make it all hang together. And obviously there's an issue there. To me, that's a signal that something's not quite right. The third one on this slide, general recognition of the fact, and this might be controversial, but I really do believe this. The science is never settled. In fact, I worry about the term "the science." To me, that's got something fundamentally wrong about it. I mean, there is no "the science." You know, science is about things that we are not quite sure about and will never be sure about. So it's never settled. This sort of circles back to the contest of ideas. There's no emotion. All right. You know, if I see a student and they got very strong emotion, personal emotion about something around their research, I'm not necessarily super worried, but it starts to potentially ring some warning bells to me, because the emotion needs to be quite directed towards, I guess, it ties back into the last point here, the question. So our emotion should be, and our excitement should be about the question. What the answer is of interest to us, but we should be not emotional about the answer. And to me, that one of the big reasons why I would say that is it's all about independence. And the thing about independence, it's the actuality. So you have to actually be independent. You have to be seen to be independent. And I guess more recently, there's even the third dimension of that you have to worry about whether there's potential for you not to be independent, because that can raise questions about those that might see your research and try and make some judgment about it. I worry sometimes that there could almost be an element of bullying from some researchers about their particular results and findings, that, you know, at least in a subtle sense, it's like you either, you know, this is what I found, this is how the world works, and if you disagree, you're wrong. And of course, that's not science, that's not research. It's not about advocacy either. I mean, advocacy and research to me, and this could be controversial, totally separate things. And, you know, I'd worry about them bring so research to all this quite clearly. So I want just to think about the scholarly research just a little bit more. I've got on the quote on our local Reef Council. The reason I've used this is convenience, because, you know, we need to become experts in our own setting, and so I have incentive to understand how Australia works, and less incentive about what similar pronouncements there are in Europe or the UK. But I'm confident that this quote is not controversial and would capture very similar views worldwide. So the research is the creation of new knowledge and or the use of existing knowledge in a new and creative way so as to generate new concepts, methodologies, inventions, and understandings. It includes synthesis and analysis of previous research to the extent that it is new and creative. So a quick look at that is you see a very strong reinforcing pattern, and I've highlighted in different colours, I guess, three key terms in there. So newness or novelty, creativity, and knowledge. So what this to me reinforces is a very intuitive and appealing sort of view that research is about creating new knowledge, and that's what we should be striving to do. Now, a simple binary way of describing the world, your research world, is empirical versus theoretical, and for those of you that feel that doesn't describe where you sit, I apologise, but for the purpose of this this talk, let me just simplify the world into this binary, this two-dimensional situation. So empirical, theoretical. My base and frame for the rest of the talk will be empirical. It's much easier for me to do it that way for many reasons, including I'm an empirical researcher. Apologies for those of you that are theoretical researchers or analytical. There will be a version of this that applies to your setting, but I'm not the best person to articulate that. So I'm going to take the empirical angle. Let's go a step further just to, again, frame or anchor where I'm coming from so that you understand some of the illustrations or some of the language that I use. And again, I'll be apologising for taking a particular view, which is quantitative. So a simple view of the world, quantitative, qualitative. I know we have mixed methods and other types of research as well, but it's much easier for me to articulate my message in apologies to the qualitative researchers. This is not to indicate that the main message here of responsible science isn't relevant to you as well. You will need to make some adjustments to the things that I'm saying, and I'd certainly be happy for any qualitative researchers to chime in later on in terms of the Q&A session. So if we think of the fundamental essence of empirical research, the way I view it is it has three core elements, building blocks. There's an idea, an intellectual idea, for which we then think about what data and sample we can collect. And once we've collected that, hopefully representative data and sample, we apply some state-of-the-art tools, some gold standard tools, do the analysis, and that then allows us to explore the idea and test some hypotheses and get some answers to the basic research question that we have in mind. So in terms of responsible science, here's some things generally would cross my mind in further, I guess, statements around what I would expect to see and how, for me, I would put some dimensions on the space that I put to the challenge. So now I'm really admitting that I see research and science here as interchangeable, and I suppose responsible science, you could say it's to put it more simply, we're just striving to produce good. So if my proposition is not all science is equal, not all research is equal, and it turns out there's good research or good science and bad research or bad science. And we should be aware of that and take that into account in terms of how we do our own research, and we should strive, of course, for good science, for responsible science, for reliable science, for credible science. And so a few things that I throw at you that I think to me is a package add up to what this is about. So it's the objective and open-minded. As I've already said, passion around the question, not the answer. That good science searches for an observable about how the world works. I mean, if we could observe it on some issue, that's great. If we could directly see it and say, here, it's like a fact, we know the truth, that is fantastic, but it's not science anymore. It's not research, because the nature of research is the world is complex, where there's unobservable truth. We're trying to get some evidence that will give us more evidence about that. And one of the key things that will increase our confidence is the role of theory. Okay, in a lot of business school fields, particularly the economics-based ones, but I think this is pretty general for all of them, and certainly for quantitative. If you were to think of causality versus correlation, most researchers want to aim to tell us something about causality, about a causal link. And theory is absolutely critical, central to getting confidence a little higher. It's not going to guarantee it for us, but theory is essential to it. Now, because the world is complex and we have theory and we have models, we need some way to get manageable and to operationalize how we go about the research. And so in many fields, what this boils down to is simple, but not too far. So there's abstractions of reality, and we need to strip out some of the complexity, but not so that it becomes trivial, but allows us, if you like, in a quantitative setting, as I've already said, that's my mindset, to identify hypotheses that we can test, and they need to be falsifiable. So there's no point setting out a hypothesis which we know for sure 100% the data will support. And it could be just because of it's used in the hypothesis, you couldn't possibly reject it. Or you can make all sorts of probably unintentional mistakes, and that won't be good science. So we have to set up a real, genuine test, a falsifiable hypothesis we can test. And then what we're doing in these quantitative examples of good science is we're seeing whether data tells us we can reject the hypothesis or we fail to reject the hypothesis. What we can't do with any conclusivity is prove anything. It's just reject, fail to reject. And one of the challenges that we have in quantitative, for sure, is noise. Okay, so we have data, but it's typically noisy data. We observe proxies or constructs for theoretical variables, if you like, and so the constructs will have a component that matches the variable, and then other stuff that's noise, creates uncertainty. And so this then is an added challenge to doing good good science and reliable, responsible research. So it turns out in this setting, as we all know, that what we really can end up doing in a quantitative type of study is put on the table some probabilistic statements about the unknown truth of hypotheses and draw some inferences where we'll never know for sure, but that the rigor by which we set up our tests will hopefully convince those that are assessing our work that we have put forward credible evidence. In many cases, we're striving for evidence around causality. And so when you put all that together, for me, this circles back to one of the very early points I made. The science has never settled. There is no such thing as the science. And that's sort of my bottom line. I've in recent years dabbled a bit with social media. It's something that simultaneously annoys me and frustrates me, but also I see good value with particularly Twitter. And I discover quite a few things on Twitter once I filter out the stuff that's rubbish that I think gives great insights into all sorts of things I'm interested in. And one I discovered recently was somewhat tongue-in-cheek representation of an econ paper, an economics paper, and so these aren't real papers, of course, but there were 12 in this little tweet, and it's the titles that sort of give something away about the sorts of things we would worry about in terms of the direction of research in the 21st century. And it's not to pick on economists, economics researchers. I think to an extent indicative of some dark side, some bad direction that research generally as collectively is going. So, the first one says what sociologists have been saying for decades, but with a natural experiment. So a big thing in economics these days, the last few years, and in finance and a bit in accounting research is, and it's all driven by causality and referees being more difficult to believe a causal link. They want a natural expression, an exogenous shock. And so this title sort of indicates that, well, we're so, researchers might be so focused on doing the fancy technique and not actually realize that there might be an answer that already exists. And so we really need to do that research. I mean, does X increase if we give money for X, a randomized trial? How much research is there out there that just seems to ask a pretty obvious question? I mean, surely if X will increase if you give money for X, do you need a randomized trial? So is that good science? It doesn't sound like it's worthwhile science. Your standard errors are wrong, so the focus is too much on the techniques, perhaps. American healthcare system is stupid. Sounds like there's a bit of emotion in that title. I found some noise in the cross section of stock returns. It's like when anyone listens to asset pricing, you put your hands up and you say, "So what? Going to prison is not the best decision." Well, if we need research for that, I worry. So it goes on. We don't have to go through all. I found that very sort of insightful as sort of a backdrop, a somewhat humorous backdrop to what is a growing problem. And I want to say at this stage of my, I'm nowhere to get on this bandwagon. Action happening in business schools, but probably outside of business schools, we're even way behind. The economists are actually a bit ahead of us. In medicine, in the health field, and probably the hard sciences, some of the issues around responsible science and open science have been identified and done great work on that. And in business schools, we're behind the scene, and we need to catch up. So there's this community of responsible research in business management, and I've got the web link on this slide, and that reminds me that I've shared with the PowerPoints, and I'm not sure whether you had a chance to circulate those to you. And if you've got these slides, then you can use the link. And if you haven't got them yet, you can get them. There's 28 eminent scholars that have signed up to this 2017 position paper. And they say their 2030 vision is of a future in which business schools and scholars worldwide have successfully transformed their research toward responsible science, producing useful as problems important to business and society. So we're now at 2021. There's 9 years to go, and I guess inevitably, when you do something like this, you're going to fail in terms of meeting your time horizon. But this slide's probably hard for you to make out clearly now, but this is a bit of a who's who of the different disciplines in business around the world. It's probably a little focused on Europe, which is fine, but all the main disciplines I think are covered here: accounting, finance, marketing, management, and quite a few different management ones. So I suspect entrepreneurship. I suspect there's someone. Your disciplines reflected there. Now, I think it's not understating it or overstating it, maybe is the word, to say that this group and a bunch of people since that are, I guess, signatories to this position paper, that the state of research could be viewed as being in crisis. And you might say, well, what crisis? And in terms of this position paper, there's a twin crisis: a crisis of integrity and a crisis of relevance. And this just comes back to the concept of responsible science that I started off with. And I've repeated the slide here because I want to say a little bit more about the credible research, and in fact, in turn, each of these. And I'll keep my eye on the clock so that I give some sort of coverage to all of these, and then call it quits for the time that's been assigned. So in terms of credible research, if you have a look at their position paper, the community of responsible research in business and management. So I've come up with that ugly acronym, CRRBM. They have put forward, I think, 7 principles, and what they've numbered 4, 5, and 6 to do with credible research, or another way of putting it is translating it into some concept of knowledge, reliable knowledge. And so number 4 is valuing both basic and applied contributions. 5 is valuing plurality and multidisciplinary collaboration, and 6, sound methodology. Now, in terms of responsible science, one way I can convey a message around some of the crisis, if you like, is to think about these different views, if you like. So if you sort of take a very basic inputs, process, or outputs sort of angle. So you start with inputs, you process something, and then you have outputs. So the research process can be characterized like this. So we have inputs to research, we have a process of research, and we have outputs to research. So what could we say about each of these that could tell us something useful or interesting about responsible science? So this slide is with regard to the inputs perspective, if you like, the planning. So if we think back to any of the papers that we've done, there will be some element of planning that takes place. Now, I think sadly with many of us, and I won't point the finger at you, I'll point the finger at myself, the degree of planning that has gone into some of my papers is sadly lacking. So I've got that reflected in this 2x2 matrix. So it's sort of like that at the top of the 2x2, front end careful plans. So it's just a simple dichotomy. Yes, there has been a careful plan, or no, there hasn't. And then if we go the other dimension here, personal research goal. Is our personal research goal finding the truth about how the world works? And of course, truth's in quotes here because we never know the truth. Or playing a game. Now, on that one, you might say to yourself, well, that's offensive. Of course, everyone wants to find the truth. And you know, that's true, I think, to a point. My observation over decades now, and I'd have to say some of it's self-reflection of some of the publication scenarios I've been in, it's sadly more about playing a game than finding the truth. And I find that disturbing to actually even have to say that about some of my research. It's wrong. It shouldn't be the way. And when I look at others, I wonder. I really wonder. It does appear like it's more about playing a game than finding the truth. So 2x2 matrix. What are the cells? Well, the cell that we love to end up in is the one that has the two green headings. So yes, you have a careful plan, and your personal goal is finding the truth. I put it to you from an inputs point of view. If we land in that cell, that's pretty likely to be consistent with responsible science. If we don't land in that cell, it's pretty likely we are diverging from responsible science. And I've just put a few labels in there and we won't dwell on them. I've got a naive noisemaker, strategic optimism, and strategicism, and just straight out opportunism. So we really want to land that responsible science cell. What about this one? So now it focuses on the process of research. And again, I've characterized this in a simple way, but I think a useful way, in a 2x2 setting. So at the top there, it's about hypothesize. So this is very much a quantitative research context that I have in mind. And here it relates to hypothesizing. For me, it's the idea. What's the main driving idea behind our research? And so the two dimensions or ways of dealing with this, I'm characterizing as either ex ante, which is before the fact, or ex post, after the fact. All right? Ex ante, essentially before you see any data and do any analysis, or ex post, after you've seen the data and after you've done some analysis. Okay, so that's that one. What about the coming at it from the other side there? And here it's two dimensions around testing, which are the data and the tools. So these bring together the building blocks: idea, data, and tools. Now with testing, again, I think it's useful to characterize it as either taking a before the fact approach, ex ante, or an ex post approach. Now, I've purposely given a green color to both ex ante cases because, to me, responsible science is, as much as we can, front ending our decisions about how we're going to do our research. So as much as we can, we work out, based on theory, the models, whatever, what are the hypotheses? Put that up front. In terms of the design of our tests, before we do any analysis, as much as we can, we should work out that design, the ex ante. So the data, what data we're going to collect, the sample we're going to get, and the tools, hopefully the gold standard tools. So the intersection of those two green headings lands us in our preferred position, that is responsible science. So we're front-ending all of the design as much as we can. And again, I remind you, I'm taking a quantitative research perspective here, quantitative empirical research. Those two, the intersection of those two lands us in a zone that I think is very, very likely to leave us consistent with being producing responsible science. If we diverge from those, we get into areas that have received a bit of attention in various quarters, and I think growing attention in business school situations and around quantitative research. So if we hypothesize after the fact, we end up in the right top quadrant. So you know you've worked out the tests and the data and the tools beforehand, but after you've seen some analysis, you adjust the hypothesis after the results are known, and this is referred to as harking, H-A-R-K, hypothesizing after results are known, and I've done it. I've been in teams that have done it, and you know, I'm not proud of it. There is grey area here. You know, you could make an argument that to a point, adjusting one's hypotheses in line with now what you see in the data is valid, but I think there's a grey zone there, and then there's a line that you can cross, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. So what about the bottom left-hand cell? So we stick with our hypothesis, our ex-ante hypothesis. We don't change that. But what we do is once we get into the data and the tools, we start changing things. And quantitative researchers have a big menu of possibilities. And this has been labelled p-hacking, and p relates to or refers to p-value. Okay, so we're desperate after, what researchers are desperately after are statistically significant results. Why? Because journals are likely to only want to publish statistically significant results. So one thing that can be induced by that situation is that research teams become focused on finding a way of getting a p-value that's less than 0.05 and then is statistically significant at the 5% level. Again, it's not responsible science. P-hacking and harking are certainly out of the zone of responsible science, and I've invented the cross of those two. So if you bring those two together, it's p-harking, and that's even worse, and I put it in red just to emphasize that. So what about a little bit of time here? I'm 40 minutes in, so I'm probably going to go close to the hour on my book. So let me talk about the outputs around responsible science. So the outputs perspective. So again, the centerpiece of this exhibit is a 2x2, but I've got a 3x3 happening, and I'll talk about the bottom row and the far right column in a minute. So if in your mind's eye, just block out the third column and the third row, and just for the moment, look at it as a 2x2. And both of those 2x2s have a yes-no setup. So again, it's simplifying the world as binary. And top, now I've got responsible science as sort of the focus there. So it's simply a question: are we following responsible science? Yes or no? And clearly, we want to be following responsible science. So So we want to find ourselves in that first column, the yes column. What about going the other way? It's characterized here as, do we find significant results? Okay, so that's a key way of characterizing the outputs, whether we have significant results at the end of our analysis. Yes, no. Now, given the way the world is set up and publishing, given those two choices, we'll always want to be in the yes category. Okay? So when you think about it, if our ideal setting is the intersection of the two yeses, and I've labeled that cell, it's a good idea and it works. And that's when we celebrate. The corks, the champagne corks pop, and we're really excited. So that's sort of like scenario one. But there are other scenarios, and we need, I want to think about these in terms of what they mean and when we might, sometimes we end up in these cells, and we should be a bit nervous about that. So let's work down the first column. So responsible science, yes. Okay, so there's two outcomes here. If we have significant results, it's a good idea that works. If we don't have significant results, it's still a good idea. It just didn't work, at least according to the way journals and referees and editors and the whole ecosystem is set up. It didn't work. Although we need to question that, because and it was statistically insignificant. In a sense, it worked because we understand how the world works more than if the analysis wasn't done. Work because now we're sad we may not get it published. So what about the no column? So responsible science, and this is a column we want to avoid. So we get significant results, but we didn't follow responsible science. It may get published, but it's bad research, because if we didn't follow responsible science, it's highly unlikely it can be relied upon. It's not credible. Now, if we didn't follow responsible science, so no column, and we didn't find significant results, it's what I've labeled dumb research. Like, it doesn't bear even commenting on beyond that. So the extra column, right-hand column and row, are just to ask some additional questions around these outputs. So let's go to the right-hand column. Does this get published? So basically, if you have significant results, so you're in that first, the yes row, does this get published? Yes. There may, the process might be able to weed out the good idea that works versus a bad research, but we have to wonder about how well that works. If there's no significant results, does this get published? Very likely no. In the good journals and even some of the not so good journals, you try and find a paper that's published that has insignificant results. They're very rare. And I think this is symptomatic of what could be an underlying problem. And I'm a journal editor, and I worry about this, and I'm trying to make some little steps towards fixing this, and maybe in the Q&A for me to share with you some of the things that I'm doing. Now, the bottom row there, should this get published? So in the first column, basically it's a resounding yes. If we followed responsible science, whether it's statistically significant or not, if we've decided it's a good idea at the beginning, the world, our colleagues, need to know it should get published, but only the first part is likely to get published. That is, we follow responsible science, and we get significant results. So there's a problem there. I think it's indicating there may be some type of publication bias. And the column that's no for responsible science, should this ever get published? No. I don't think that's controversial, because either if we publish that, we're publishing bad research or research. So all of this sort of, to me, points to some lurking potential concerns in the publishing game. And I've sort of hinted at some of this, and I think we can skip over quickly now some of this stuff. But biased publication outcomes. So there's this in quantitative research. To me, I wouldn't, I'm happy to say that there's some degree of bias towards significant supportive findings. And I think that's wrong. And I think we've got to, over time, try and fix that. And there are ways to chip away at this. They're not perfect, because there's always human nature that can intervene. And I can talk about those in the Q&A if the opportunity arises. Replication is all central and party to responsible science, and there's plenty of growing evidence about failures of replication. But I think there's a growing and important role for replication. It's something I've experimented with my journal, and I think more journals need to go down this path, and that could be something you might want to talk about in Q&A. Soft and hard versions of research misconduct. Well, in terms of soft misconduct, it could be honest error or sort of soft versions of the p-hacking and hacking that I mentioned earlier, but they can then slip over to what I would call hard misconduct. And this is going to occur for those research teams that basically get up in the morning and say, our goal is to p-hack. Our goal is to hack. Our goal is to do whatever we need to do to get published. And if that really is the mantra of the research team, it's very extreme. And if it's systematic, it crosses the line. Now, how common is this? I'm happy to say I don't believe it's very common, but I put it to you that in some of the quantitative areas, it does occur, and that worries me. Now, the rest of these things we definitely want to avoid: fraud, fabrication, falsification, plagiarism, and retractions. You don't want your paper retracted for those reasons or any other. Let's move on to relevant research, and I think this one doesn't require too much extra commentary, because the nature of it is I think quite self-explanatory and appealing. So relevant research is just to get us to think more about, at the time we're choosing potential projects, choosing some that might lead to more directly useful knowledge. And the CRRBM, the Community for Responsible Research in Business and Management, they've got 4 principles linked to this. If you have a look at their position paper, principle 1, service to society; 2, involves stakeholders; 3, impact on stakeholders; and 7, broad dissemination. And then they go on and talk a little bit about 5 topic areas of greater focus, which are listed at the bottom of this slide, and many of those topics will not be a surprise to you. So that's pretty well mapped out. What about independent research? Let me say that independent research, in terms of a conversion to knowledge concept, I think it's fairly easily summarized as: we want to put on the table unbiased knowledge. Okay, so it's basically, as best you can, depict that evidence, and if there's a bunch of evidence on the table, to pick through it in a way that is as objective as we can, to recognizing there's a degree of noise and uncertainty, but this is the unbiased view. So in terms of independence, as I've already indicated, there's, I guess, those three dimensions that we need to be aware of. It's not just the actuality of being independent, it's the perception and it's the potential. I worry a little bit about some researchers that their personal independence gets a bit blurred around faith. And I'm going to give you a thought experiment to illustrate what I've got in mind here, at least in terms of, for me, indicating how you would deal with this particular issue or problem. There's a tension between, us as researchers versus funders versus stakeholders versus advocates and lobbyists. That can get in the way of the independence of the research. There has to be a contest of ideas at the end of the day. And if we're in a situation where it seems like that's absent, I just can't bring myself to agree that it's a research area. It might be something that's very important to a lot of people, but there must always be a contest of ideas. So this is now circling back to some of the things I said earlier. So nothing is ever settled, incontestable, truths do not exist. But now this is really honing in on the independent research angle. So otherwise, it's not research, it's not reliable, it's not useful. So here's the thought experiment. And really, it ends with a rhetorical question. If you don't know the answer after step 3, then I don't know what I can do for you. But I'll just read you through this thought experiment. So try this out. So, you can almost shut your eyes. I can't shut my eyes because I have to read it to you. But so step 1, choose question X, whatever question X is. And you don't even have to put, just keep it abstract. So question X, for which you truly don't know the answer. So that's step 1. So just imagine it. Question X, you don't know the answer. Step 2, hypothetically speculate the full set of possible answers. And let's just label them. But again, this can all be very abstract. It works perfectly as abstract. So answer A1, answer A2, A3, and give them labels as far as they need to go. It's just a thought experiment. And here's the killer for the thought experiment. And I pose it as a question, but it's rhetorical. So can question X that you identified in step 1 lead to responsible science if some of the A answers, potential answers in step 2, if some of those fundamentally undermine your strongly held beliefs and values? Can that question really lead to responsible science? So around independence, I think there's a tug of war between passion and objectivity. And for me, responsible science, as circling back to something very early on, passion is wonderful. All experienced researchers will say, have passion about your research. And I agree with that, but I like to, just make it quite clear how I would like that passion to be focused. And it's all about the question. Be absolutely passionate about the question and objective about the answer. And sort of the reading between the lines there is, you don't know what the answer is, and you need to try and collect evidence objectively to give you a probabilistic statement in a quantitative empirical research setting of what you think is the most likely answer. So if we take on board that there are potential problems in the whole ecosystem, that position paper that I mentioned earlier was talking about, and I'm looking at my watch, there's about 5 minutes left of my hour, so I'm going to round out now in the next 5 minutes to leave time for Q&A. We all should individually strive to be responsible scientists. That could be sort of one view of how we can fix this. And I don't necessarily agree with everything in that position paper, I must say. I'm largely on board, and some of it, we don't all have to agree, and it's sort of like a contest of ideas. But I do buy into the argument that to come up to get the sort of solutions we need, there's going to have to be quite a bit of movement simultaneously or close to simultaneously in different elements of the ecosystem. Otherwise, so individual efforts are going to fail. So it's not as easy as it sounds. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why, and it's all embedded. It's almost hardwired in a lot, the way research is these days, particularly in business schools, probably more broadly. The journal articles are a unit of currency. There's a small set of elite journals. There's reputation and citation metrics. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's like this equilibrium, and equilibrium change is difficult. And the way the position paper puts it is, well, imagine some visionary people within the ecosystem that decide they're going to go it alone. And I'll, pick the middle one in this slide in green there, the visionary editor. So you say there's something wrong here. There's something wrong in the state of Denmark, and I think there is. And so the journal editor's got to take some risks, because the sorts of things that need to be done are going to go against the established norms. For example, publishing replications. Everyone could find it very easy to point a finger at a journal and say, did you see they're publishing replications? That is disgraceful. What a waste of journal pages, blah, 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 blah. Or did you see that journal did something else? And so the problem is that could spiral into less readership, less citations, lower impact. And so if those pieces are still there, we've got a problem. So it's not as easy as it sounds, but all the stakeholders have a part to play in this, and everyone has to make their sort of judgment on how much they can do. And it's not for me to say everyone should do whatever, but I think it's interesting to look at what could be done. So from journal editors, you could publish replications. You could have a pre-registration process around publication. And some of those things we could talk about in Q&A if that appeals to you. But, university leaders and deans, they're going to have to try and help change. Governments and funding agencies, we're seeing efforts in Europe and also in Australia and my part of the world where things are changing. Scholars, I think they are probably going to be a bit laggard, because while I would not want to encourage people to be irresponsible scientists or irresponsible researchers, if you go too hard, too full, your career can be sort of curtailed. But I would certainly want to encourage individual scholars to take a more open view to what I describe as responsible science. Now, some final thoughts, and again, I look close at home, but I'm sure there are similar things in your part of the world, in Europe and the like. Universities Australia, which is representative of our 39, 40 or 41 universities. I don't know quite exactly the number we've got. We've got a code of responsible research. I'm sure there's something similar in your part of the world. They put out stuff on management of data and information, authorship, the credit initiative, and engagement and impact, replication, and pre-registration. And there's actually some modules that I'm working on around those latter ones. In terms of the code of responsible research, and I'm wrapping up now, there's a whole bunch of things under the heading of responsibilities of researchers. No surprises here, but it's good just to see them in writing and sort of say, okay, well, it's something I should take note of. So the culture of responsible research, we've got to start to change a culture, because I think we've got ourselves to a point where we've forgotten what that might be. Mentorship, education and training, appropriate tools, data and materials, conflict of interest, authorship and acknowledgement. And some of you, probably many of you, have come in contact now with credit, the contributor roles taxonomy, and the latest incarnation of this that I've seen is Allen et al., the 2019, where they just get us to think about being more honest of the roles. And, you know, there's more than a dozen roles here in terms of credit category, and they've got definitions. And I think this is part of the mix, that we're much more honest about those contributions to research teams. There's a really good video that I'd recommend you have a look at. Brian Nosek, one of the leading lights in the global scene around responsible science. And this video was recorded at University of Queensland, I think a couple of years ago, shifting incentives from getting it published to getting it right. In the end, I'm going to stop there, but I'm going to come back. I want to have 5 minutes at the end just to tell you about an initiative that I'm developing, and I'm hoping that around responsible science, I can entice you to come on board and be part of this initiative. So I'll just leave that slide up for the moment. I've gone a little bit over my hour, but I'll stop there, and happy to take some questions that hopefully accumulated.
Thank you, Robert. Many thanks. We have a first question in the chat from Victor Holloway. Perhaps can you see it?
Yeah, I'm opening it up now. Sorry, okay, so warm welcome. Okay, Victor. So, dear Robert, your responsible science is quite integrative and comprising ethical concepts, misconduct and integrity, processual aspect of searching and knowledge creation, quality and validity issues, and so on. It seems that the term responsible does not cover all presented attributes and does not fully correspond to your much broader concept. Okay, that's a reasonable response. I suppose I would have to contemplate that a little more in detail to really see whether there's, you know, I think I've only got one language, and it's English, and sometimes sadly for those that are bilingual, multilingual, well, sadly for me, I feel like many of you are operating in your second or third language, and you seem to have a better grasp of the definition of particular English words, and maybe that's sort of partly reflected here. But my view of the way in which we can use the English language is to have some degree of, bring our broader interpretation to it, so that in part to help it fit a purpose. So maybe what's happening here is that I've conveniently taken a much broader interpretation of responsible than you would be used to. And there's a bit of what we might say is artistic or poetic license to pull it under. So, I think to me, being responsible can have many nuances and many dimensions, and I think it works. I don't see that you're giving me a huge criticism there. It's more a comment. So I'll ponder that, but I do appreciate that bit of feedback. So with Maurice, I'm trying to. Yeah, there's big. Sorry. So I think it's Maurice is the next one. Okay, so you're thanking me for a passionate yet objective presentation. I hope so. I mean, it's tricky sometimes. You can be passionate and then you wonder whether you're objective. Okay, you have to leave. Looking forward to the next webinar. Oh, good. Okay. Yep. Okay, registration links. Okay. Oh, that's all of the typed in chat of questions. Are there any other questions you would like to ask? I mean, one thing I could, while you may be pondering some more questions, I could fast more just to tell you about my little initiative that is
Yes, please.
about responsible science. So I've come up with this wonderful, to me anyway, wonderful acronym. It's INSPIRES. And so it derives from, and I just need to be, to get that off. It derives from the longer title of the International Society of Pitching Research for Responsible Science, but it's essentially driven around responsible science. So it's a globally facing research network primarily aimed at research training and capacity building, resting on a foundation theme of responsible science. So I guess what you can take away from today's session is for me anyway, I've set the scene of that foundation stone, that foundation theme. And what I'm hoping to do is draw together as broader and as big a variation of members across all corners of the globe, and I'll give you an update of where things stand at the moment in terms of building the network, where I want to create content that is there to help capacity build and to and form a research training, particularly in those universities or those parts of the world where this is really tough. So, for example, but it's certainly not the only one that I have in my mind, I've got a number of members in Africa, in several of the countries in Africa. I think at last count, I have members in 10 African countries. And we all know that in Africa, there are super challenges in pretty much every single aspect of life. So sadly, I can't help in many of those situations, but I think for me, what is possible, and what I'm going to try and do in terms of assistance is to deliver via almost exclusively virtual content, some modules and some training, research training and capacity and research capacity building that builds on this foundation theme of responsible science. But that's just an example. I think there's many situations and many jurisdictions and countries and universities around the world, even at some of the better resourced places where this training and capacity building can be enhanced. And I think what this also will do is bring the power of the network. So I think the bigger the network, the more diverse the network, it gives added value and power to what the network can achieve. So where do we stand right now? I've been building this since early March, and we have over 600 members now. And I'm mainly focused on trying to get tentacles out into as many parts of the world as I can. So I've actually got members in 75 countries or jurisdictions, which I'm pretty proud of. I mean, it would be pretty clear from doing some simple arithmetic. There'll be a number of those countries and jurisdictions where I have just one or maybe two, but we have to start somewhere. And I think what I hope to do once I can roll out some content, and pretty much the main and foundation stone content will be a version of today's talk. But that's just the foundation stone of it, to basically set the scene for what responsible science is about. And if you're interested in terms of the coverage, there it is, Australia, for obvious reasons. This is pretty much in order of when different members came on board. So the last new one has come in from Zimbabwe, and I had a lot of trouble getting anyone in Denmark. That sort of was annoying me somewhat. There's quite a number of countries I think I should still be able to get, and so I know it sounds a bit crazy, but my goal is to have at least 100 countries and jurisdictions in the list, and so if any of you, so there's a few steps here. Inspires me, you. So if it's not today's talk, you sort of think, hey, there'd be something quite interesting in this, and I want to be part of it. I want you to be part of it as well. So if you've got these slides, or if you get them soon, because these links are a little bit difficult to write down, but if you have the slides, you put it in presentation mode, hover over it, click it, and it'll take you to a Google Docs link, the first one. And if you're in a jurisdiction, I think in Europe you should be okay. There's certain jurisdictions, which I won't mention by name, where Google doesn't work so well, so we have an alternative. 5 minutes to register. We just collect a little bit of information that helps us understand better who is in the network. Total privacy, and I'd really love for you to be part of the network, and if you're able additionally to help me increase the expanse of the network beyond these countries and jurisdictions, I'd be very happy about that. But nevertheless, even if you belong to one of these wonderful places, you'd be very welcome. It's something I'm extremely passionate about. I think this has a lot of upside, and apart from anything else, as I've already alluded to, I think there's a big social objective that can be achieved here, as well as an objective that helps researchers generally. And it's not just about helping early career researchers or PhD students or research students. It helps supervisors and senior researchers as well, because anything that helps one part of the ecosystem is going to have spillover positivities for us all. So, as this little slide says, Inspires needs you, and hopefully you feel that you might need Inspires. So, hopefully I've inspired you, and you very soon take the opportunity to sign up and be part of this. I'd be very excited. So that's my little cell of the network. We'll go back to chat. Okay. So Geraldine has had to leave. I'm happy to take a final question. Otherwise, we can stop it there. All right, Jerome, I think we've reached the conclusion. So I'm very pleased and excited that I've had the opportunity to kick the new workshop series off, and I'll look forward to the follow-on sessions, and I'm sure it will be a resounding success. So thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Robert. It has been a very great first webinar for the Institute. So I really, I think in behalf of the Institute, I really want to express our very big thanks to you. Thanks for your time, your energy in setting up and sharing this first webinar. That's the launch of the webinar series. As Geraldine has been obliged to leave to join another meeting, but she really want to express our big thanks to you, Robert, and also to all the attendees. As you know,